Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Seberine in Washington, Robert Pierpoint in Washington, Harry Reasoner in New York, Peter Kalischer in Paris, Robert Shackney in New York, Bob Simon in New Haven, and George Herman in Memphis.
Good evening. President-elect Nixon said today that the times require that President Johnson, until Inauguration Day, speak for both the old and the new administrations on foreign affairs. From such continuity, Nixon said, after a White House meeting with Johnson, might come real progress toward peace. Robert Pierpoint reports.
The Nixons arrived almost 15 minutes early for the 1:30 luncheon, but the host and hostess, forewarned by radio, were waiting. The atmosphere was relaxed and everyone seemed quite happy, almost like old friends at a reunion. After lunch inside, the ladies took a tour. The men talked world affairs for over 2 hours, then issued brief statements.
Both he and I are going to do everything that we possibly can to see that the wheels of government operate at maximum efficiency, not only from now until January the 20th, but for all time to come. Secretary Rusk briefed the President-elect on his trip to NATO. He will leave tomorrow on matters in Vietnam, on the situation in Eastern Europe, on the Middle East, and answered various questions that the President-elect had to ask. Secretary Clifford and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff reviewed various military matters with President-elect Nixon. Needless to say, it was a very pleasant and cooperative meeting, as we expect all of these meetings in the days ahead to be. And Mrs. Johnson and I want to do everything that we possibly can to help the new president and his charming wife with the burdens that they're assuming on behalf of all of us.
The point that I think that should be made that distinguishes this transition period from others is this. The nation at this time in its foreign policy has several matters, Vietnam, of course, at the top of the list, which cannot await decision and cannot afford a gap of 2 months in which no action occurs. If, however, action is to occur, if progress is to be made on matters like Vietnam, the current possible crisis in the Mideast, the relations between the United States and the Soviet Union with regard to certain outstanding matters. If progress is to be made in any of these fields, it can be made only if the parties on the other side realize that the current administration is setting forth policies that will be carried forward by the next administration. For that reason, our discussion was extremely candid and forthright with regard to the policy decisions and the negotiations and discussions that will go on with regard to Vietnam and other matters. And I gave assurance in each instance to the Secretary of State and, of course, to the President that they could speak not just for this administration, but for the nation, and that meant for the next administration as well. For that reason, I think these discussions were not only very helpful from my standpoint, but I think, Mr. President, you would agree that they were helpful, too, from the standpoint of seeing to it that in these next 60 days, this very critical period, rather than having the lapse of a lame duck presidency in effect, we might have some very significant action, progress toward peace.
There was a hint in what the president said that he and the president-elect would meet again. But what came through most clearly was Mr. Nixon's apparently firm commitment to President Johnson's foreign policies. It would seem that bipartisanship, at least in foreign affairs, is back in style. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, Washington.
Heavy security marked Nixon's return later to New York, where 3 Arab immigrants are being held on charges of plotting to assassinate him. The 3, a father and 2 sons from Yemen, were arrested Saturday in Brooklyn. Authorities have disclosed few details about the alleged conspiracy.
Honey, it's 3 in the morning.
I can't sleep.
When simple nervous tension keeps you awake, take Suminex as directed for 100% safe sleep.
Suminex contains 3 medical ingredients to bring on restful sleep.
Take Suminex tonight and sleep. Safe and restful sleep, sleep, sleep.
Take Take 2 Sominex tablets.
And sleep.
Now, also in capsules, hundreds of sleep-inducing granules.
In every Sominex capsule. Try it.
Go ahead, splash it on and get the Frostline lift. The Aqua Velva Frostline lift. What a lift with Frostline. Frostline is the refreshing new aftershave with livelier lines for that Frostline lift.
There's something about an Aqua Velva, man.
Get that Aqua Velva Frostline lift.
In Memphis, James Earl Ray still is officially scheduled to go on trial tomorrow, charged in the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. last April. But Ray now has switched lawyers and brought in famed defense attorney Percy Foreman, who plans to ask for a postponement of the trial date. George Herman reports.
The lawyer fired by James Earl Ray is Arthur Haynes Sr. of Birmingham. He's admitted for some time that he was having difficulties with his client, but came to Memphis prepared to go ahead with the trial anyway.
I was ready to go to trial Tuesday morning. I did not come to Memphis today just for the ride, gentlemen. I came to play a ball game, I'll say that.
What do you mean by that, sir?
I mean, I came here ready to go to trial.
Are you going to fight this request, can you?
No, sir, I don't intend to. I never want a reluctant client, gentlemen, ever.
Mr. Haynes, what about the financial arrangements? Have you been paid?
I'm not going to comment on any of that at this time, gentlemen. That's a matter between me and my client.
The man who now replaces Haynes is Percy Foreman of Houston, a huge man with a huge reputation for defending men and women accused of murder. Foreman has refused all comment on the Ray case under orders from the court. But some time ago, he outlined his general philosophy in an interview with Harry Reasoner for the CBS News special, The Trial Lawyer.
What about a defense attorney's relationship with his clients? Can you accept a client whom you know or suspect is guilty and represent him?
I have defended many men that I knew were guilty. I have no more right to refuse to represent a man that I know to be guilty than a doctor has to refuse to represent a man because he's certain he's going to die, and it would hurt his reputation to have a dead patient. There's almost as much law violated in the trial of a lawsuit by either the arresting officers or the prosecuting attorney, sometimes by the judge. You'll find the law being violated every day, hour after hour. It's the defense lawyer's duty to see that that does not happen. I consider myself a law enforcement officer. I enforce the law against the state.
Judge Battle has now opened the courtroom seats which had been reserved for prospective jurors, opened them to the general public, a clear indication he intends to postpone the case at Foreman's request. Presumably, it will now be delayed at least until next January. George Herman, CBS News, Memphis.
The nation's Roman Catholic bishops met today in Washington, and they took up a proposal that would leave decisions on birth control up to the individual. Similar positions have been taken by church leaders in several countries, despite Pope Paul's encyclical condemning artificial birth control methods. The more than 200 U.S. bishops are to begin closed-door debate tomorrow on the draft document. In the Vatican today, Pope Paul said that Roman Catholics must accept their church as it is, and he warned against any tendency toward what he termed an imaginary church, which each would conceive and organize according to his own ideas.
We're thinking about introducing Benson & Hedges 100s around the world. After all, we've had the disadvantages to ourselves long enough. Cigarette that made Extra Puffs popular in America make Extra Puffs popular around the world?
This fine razor isn't made by Persona.
It's made by a competitor. But to get the best shave with it, use the new electro-coated Persona blade. Maybe someday we'll make the best razor. But for now, we'll settle for the best blade, the electro-coated Persona.
North Vietnamese gunners inside the demilitarized zone have fired on American troops for the first time since the bombing of the North was halted on November the 1st. The U.S. command said enemy shells hit Con Thien and nearby positions yesterday, killing 4 Marines and wounding 41. However, American commanders indicated they did not regard the attack as a major violation of the understanding that led President Johnson to end the bombing. In Sunday's incident, U.S. counterfire destroyed 2 of the enemy positions. In Paris today, U.S. diplomats had another meeting with South Vietnam's special envoy, but there was no indication that Saigon has softened its opposition to the National Liberation Front participating in the Paris talks as a separate entity. It's been insisting that the front, the Viet Cong's political arm, must sit in as part of the North Vietnamese delegation. Over the weekend, CBS News correspondent Peter Kalischer interviewed the front's chief representative in Paris, Mrs. Nguyen Thi Binh. And through an interpreter, he brought up the Saigon regime and questions submitted in advance.
What attitude will you adopt toward the representatives of the Saigon administration when you actually sit down at the table with them?
The South Vietnam National Front for Liberation has come to the conference of 4 parties with a serious attitude and a good intention to find out a political solution to the South Vietnamese problem, which would meet the aspirations of the 14 million population of South Vietnam. That is, the building of an independent, democratic, peaceful, independent and prosperous Vietnam, advancing towards the peaceful reunification of the fatherland. The present Saigon administration is a clique of traitors who stubbornly serve the American aggressors and run counter to the interests and the aspirations of the South Vietnamese population. Its presence at the conference of 4 parties on Vietnam does not mean recognition of that regime by the South Vietnam National Front for Liberation.
Do you think Mr. Nixon's election will have any effect on the talks?
If Mr. Nixon wants to solve the South Vietnamese problem, he must end the war of aggression in Vietnam, withdraw all the American troops, and respect the rights of and the sacred national rights of the South Vietnamese population.
The AP quoted communist diplomats in London today as saying that Russia would like to see the United States maintain a military presence in Southeast Asia even after a Vietnam peace. They gave the impression, at least, that the Russians hoped to work out some sort of peacekeeping arrangement in the area with President-elect Nixon. According to the diplomats, this would be designed to counter any expansion aims by Red China. The Soviet government newspaper Izvestia said today that Russia has become a naval power in the Mediterranean and that it's going to maintain its presence there, quote, for the peace and security of the area. At one time, the Mediterranean was practically the sole preserve of the U.S. Sixth Fleet, but the Soviets now have about 50 vessels there. Their argument for the buildup is that Russia borders on the Black Sea and its southern frontiers are close to the Mediterranean. Czechoslovakia today expelled 7 Western newsmen, including 5 who worked for American news agencies. Prague authorities said they did not have proper visas. The UN General Assembly began its annual debate today on whether to seat Red China. Cambodia led it off with an appeal for Peking's admission. The nationalist Chinese countered with a charge that the Mao Zedong regime is unfit for UN membership. A vote on the issue, expected Friday, is all but certain to go against the communist Chinese once again. In Geneva, the International Red Cross today announced a $25 million 4-month program to combat famine in secessionist Biafra. It will be the agency's biggest relief project since World War II. And the United States has pledged $2.5 million to the fund.
Fall. Vacations are over. Everybody seems to huddle a little closer,
kind of getting out of the cold. The family gets together. Grandma cooks. Everybody laughs. Great days. Oh, maybe a little spilled gravy, a couple of arguments. But mostly wonderful moments. And if you've got a Polaroid color pack camera, at the end of the day, you're left with even more than memories. It's under $50. That's quite a buy.
About 60 students took over part of the University of Connecticut administration building today and vowed not to leave unless amnesty is granted for a protest 2 weeks ago. Deeply involved in the action is an organization of young radicals, the Students for a Democratic Society, an activist force both on and off campus across the nation. Tonight, in the second of our series of reports on the SDS, Robert Shackney examines the question, what do they want?
When the students rebelled on the Columbia campus last spring, seizing buildings and fighting police, it became apparent that there was a new and very different kind of political force at work. SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society, radical, combative, and promising more of the same.
Even in a less fevered campus atmosphere this autumn, the power of student radicals to spark protest causes a lot of viewing with alarm. On the available evidence, SDS is hardly a disciplined revolutionary conspiracy. Student radicals often can't deliver on what they promise, but they do have their successes, and many of them are still trying very hard.
What we're doing is that we're expanding contact lists around the state.
The most recent national SDS gathering, a national council meeting at the University of Colorado, hearing proposals for more recruiting on high school campuses and for protest demonstrations. SDS, which began in 1962 as a liberal political organization, is now self-avowedly and proudly radical. Its membership, some of the brightest kids in schools, most of them from comfortable families, mostly white. All of them deeply opposed to the war, suspicious of the system, and suspicious of any kind of rigid authority or ideology. They profess to be motivated by a desire to create a better country.
And I don't want to use a Marxist term, but I think that there are different classes in America, and it's something we haven't been able to realize. But I think that part of what's fundamentally wrong with America, I think what many of us are groping towards, is that we think that there are certain basic economic inequities in America today.
The mass of the people have got to get together and democratically do it themselves by taking over every aspect of life in this country and controlling it in the interests of the bulk of the people who are being impoverished and sent away to wars instead of the interests of the rights of property.
What we want to do, in the most general way, is have the exploited strata of this society take over the resources which they should own and control. That's a very general answer about the society, but it's beginning.
Professor Kenneth Keniston of Yale University, an expert on the student protest movement, talking to reporter Bob Simon.
I think, for one thing, these are among the most able and most idealistic students around, and they're precisely the students from whom we would expect that the leaders of tomorrow would come. For another thing, these are students who have an enormous influence on many of their non-SGS classmates and colleagues. They don't speak for them, but they influence them. And the fact that they've been as successful as they have, I think, suggests that many other students, while they won't go all the way with SDS, share some of the same feeling of being, in their terms, turned off by American society, the same questions about whether American society will crash through with the kinds of programs of social justice and reform and foreign policy that SDS is pushing.
At Columbia University, SDS has never numbered more than a few hundred, but many more students at times have supported SDS causes, like those who attended this gathering to demand that SDS be given on-campus privileges, and like those involved in other, more moderate campus organizations.
They are able to command support because they speak to the issues that students feel very deeply on, and they are willing to go out there and put their bodies on the line and do something about it. And their example is able to mobilize other people.
But I mean, why do people have to, go through his personal life?
The SDS activist lives in a special world of sectarian argument and of political confrontation. His talk can be violent. It's often designed to outrage and disrupt. But what he says and what he does are not necessarily the same. The rhetoric frequently is far more violent than the reality.
Myself, I consider myself, I guess, a revolutionary anarchist. So my concept is probably a bit different than probably the majority of people within SDS. I sort of see my role as working with the people, working within groups for the destruction of the institutions, for the destruction of capitalism, for the destruction of the bourgeois state. And what that's replaced with, I feel that would be determined by the people. I feel my job is to free man from those institutions.
I think the young radicals, SDS and other young radicals, don't yet have that conception of what it is that they want, and they, I think, would be the first to admit that they're unclear. They know what they don't want, they know what has to be stopped, but they don't know what can replace it. And I think this is a great tragedy in American society, that we sort of expect the younger generation to rescue us, and nobody who's older is really contemplating what kind of new society there ought to be. I mean, I think many people would agree that a lot of things in the society have to be stopped or reversed, and yet we expect the kids to do it. And not only are they to do that job, but without any experience, without any wisdom coming from experience, they're also expected to create the new utopia. They're not going to do it.
Predictions about SDS are often difficult, if only because the organization is so loosely structured and so subject to change. Its members often prefer to consider themselves part of a movement rather than as followers of a disciplined organization. There are those who blame SDS for causing campus turmoil, but it also can be argued that SDS really reflects student dissatisfaction rather than creates it. Robert Shackney, CBS News, New York.
The Pentagon spent some $43 billion for military procurement last year, and today Comptroller General Elmer Stotts told a Senate hearing that only 11.5% of that involved competitive bidding. Stotts said that emergency needs created by the Vietnam War have helped cause a steady downward trend in competitive bidding. He also testified that on more than half of the Pentagon orders, the government does not know exactly how much profit the contractors make. The New York, American, and other stock exchanges were closed for Veterans Day. As a result, they will be open Wednesday this week rather than shut down as they've been doing lately. The Soviet Union said today it's launched a new unmanned spacecraft, Zone 6, toward the moon. But as usual, few details were given. Some Western observers think the Russians may be trying to improve on the September flight of Zone 5, which scored a space first by looping around the moon, but was believed to have landed back here faster than desired. U.S. space officials have scheduled a Washington news conference for tomorrow, and they're expected to announce that Apollo 8 will make man's first trip to the moon next month. The three-man capsule would orbit around the moon for almost a full day, probably Christmas Eve, before returning to Earth.
What causes my heartburn? My indigestion.
In your stomach, excess acid may build, and build can cause acid indigestion, heartburn, that burning sensation. But Rolaids, with its exclusive buffering compound, has thousands of absorbent particles. Each consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid, gives fast, lasting relief. Rolaids consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid.
Hey, Nick, Cap. Ah, Listerine. Does our captain have bad breath?
Captain has a date. Do you?
Well,
Why you guys take chances?
What do you mean?
Listerine kills germs that can cause bad breath, and it lasts.
Ready, Johnny?
And that proves my point, right?
Right.
I see you guys learn fast.
Okay, Captain, you made your point.
And so did Listerine Antiseptic. Kills germs, keeps breath fresh for hours.
Now to Eric Severide of Washington for some thoughts on the meeting today between President Johnson and his successor. Eric?
This Armistice Day, as November 11th used to be called, was an appropriate moment for the meeting of the outgoing and the incoming presidents. Their presidencies have been unmade and made by the same series of events, principally a war now hopefully beginning to unwind. The spirit of this capital, as between those going out and those coming in, is proper and polite, but the victors are not crowing and the losers are not exactly resigned. It is armistice no more, a delicate period in personal and institutional relationships here. Since Mr. Johnson will have his published memoirs out years before Mr. Nixon does, the first full account of what was really said at today's luncheon will no doubt be the Johnson version. Mr. Nixon is no stranger to the federal establishment and its overwhelming problems, so presumably this meeting was more fruitful than that between Roosevelt and Hoover in '33, when, so Hoover felt, Roosevelt failed to grasp the immediate necessities. Or that between Eisenhower and Truman in '52, when the general seemed dazed by the problems spread before him and said virtually nothing save to ask for memoranda to follow. Mr. Nixon seems to be following the prudent example of those two presidents-elect, as well as that of Kennedy in '60, and making no commitments on present policies that could diminish his own freedom of action. Rare has been the new president who found the realities permitting him sharply alternative policies in the short run. Mr. Nixon is inheriting an ongoing war. There seems a real chance that the level of fighting will diminish and stay diminished, but there seems every chance also that the financial cost of our military operation in Vietnam will not seriously diminish for many months at best. So few people here believe that Nixon will be able to increase our nuclear superiority vis-a-vis Russia, as he's talked of doing, pay for Vietnam, and at the same time deal realistically with domestic ills. Tax relief is nothing to bet on, in spite of the traditional Republican yearning in that direction. The atmosphere here is one of somberness, not one of terrible tension and crisis, and not of optimistic excitement either. Rarely has power been transferred at the top with so meager and upbeat a feeling in the country. The president-elect is acutely aware of this. His advisers have suggested that he may do away with the traditional parade and galas on Inauguration Day. That could be the appropriate fashion in which to usher in a serious new regime, which has so far avoided any top lofty heraldic motto like New Frontiers or Great Society. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Monday, November 11th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
Sure, they brush with an anti-cavity toothpaste and have regular checkups. But that's not enough. The right toothbrush is just as important. Picopay is the toothbrush more dentists recommend. Picopay's tapered tufts get toothpaste down deep where cavities often start. Get your family Picopay, the toothbrush more dentists recommend. No wonder it's the toothbrush selected for our astronauts to take into space.
Do you soak your dentures clean? You can brush them cleaner with Denture Cream. Look, we soaked that heavy lipstick stain, soaked it all night in a leading tablet cleanser. Even with soaking and vigorous brushing, that denture material is still stained. Now try Denture Cream, the powerful denture toothpaste. In no time, Denture Cream scrubs, brushes, polishes dentures clean, leaves your mouth toothpaste fresh. See the difference? Denture Cream outcleans your soak.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.